Let's move on to part 2 of developing your critical thinking. So after assessing your emotional intelligence and better understanding how you can develop your emotional intelligence, it's time to think about changing your perspective. The idea is not to totally flip everything that you believe and know to be true on its head. But by changing your perspective, what you're doing is looking at the same issue with different eyes. Have you ever looked at an issue or a problem and you can't solve it? You can't figure out how to solve the puzzle or to get it right. And someone else, a friend or a family member, comes up and points out the solution. It's right in front of you. But those people can't always be with us. So we have to learn to develop that different set of eyes or that different perspective so we can really see a whole problem. And when you can see a whole problem, you can better find a whole answer. Essentially, by changing your perspective, you're better able to pay attention to new or different details as they come up. And that's very important as well, especially when we get really in the middle of something, when we're right in the thick of our work or a problem. We sometimes don't see when new things come up. So by having this ability to change that perspective, you're more likely to catch that when it happens, and so that you can better address it. The other thing that changing our perspective helps us do, or at least acknowledging another perspective, is it allows us to make inferences. Inferences essentially are educated guesses. So let's take, for example, studying for a final exam. If you look at the final exam just from your perspective, this class is hard, here are the things I don't know, I'm not going to pass, I'm certain to fail, you're going to have a very difficult time preparing for the exam. But if you put yourself in the shoes of the instructor, what is his or her perspective? What is it that he or she needs to make sure that you know? And they are going to be testing you on that. Think of it from that perspective, and you can more than likely come up with potential questions that are going to be on that exam, and better prepare yourself not to fail, but to actually pass the exam. That is an excellent example of how changing your perspective can really help you solve a problem. Here's another example why perspective is really important. The one on the left, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to solve the cat's problem or the child's problem, but it is just kind of a funny example of how two very different creatures see the same fish from very different perspectives. Take a look at the cartoon on the right. They're both arguing from their perspective. The man on the left sees 4 blocks. The man on the right sees 3. If you look at it, I would argue that they're both right. Somehow we have to have them both change their perspective so that they can find a solution. This is one that you might need to hit pause on. Instantly, some of you might see a young woman, or some of you might see an old woman. A few of you might be able to see both and switch your perspective back and forth between the two. It's a clever one, and you're all right. Whether you see a woman, a young woman, or an old woman, there is a woman there. In fact, I see 2. Another way to enhance your critical thinking skills are to think about how you ask questions and also having doubt. First of all, asking questions is very important. It's the only way to really understand another perspective and to see that perspective. So let's talk about the different types of questions there are. We have questions of fact. For example, who is the President of the United States? There's one answer to that. There's one fact, one factual answer to that question. Questions of preference. What is your favorite color? If you ask me my favorite color and today I say blue, and you ask me that same question tomorrow and I say green, I'm still right on both days. I've changed my mind, which I do quite often. I can't figure out which one's my favorite. But think about it. You can't tell me that I'm right or wrong if I choose the color orange. It's my favorite color. It's a question of preference. Then there are questions of judgment. Should all teachers think about students' learning styles? Should all teachers allow you to use notes on your quizzes? That's a question of judgment. Some people will argue absolutely teachers should think about a student's learning styles, while others will argue not. Some will argue absolutely All teachers should let students use notes for their quizzes, while others will argue against that. It's a question of judgment. So think about, as you are developing your critical thinking skills and trying to solve any problem, how are you asking the question? Are you asking questions of fact, preference, or judgment? Doubt and uncertainty is certainly a part of critical thinking, and being able to tolerate it and live with it. It can cause some anxiety, but also it helps you develop those skills so you can really measure yourself against your past experiences. For example, do you know for certain that you will pass this class? Some of you absolutely do. Some of you might have some doubt. Is that helpful to you? Can you solve that? Can you get a definitive answer to that question? Do you know for certain that your car is safe in the parking lot right now? I think that my car is very likely safe, but I don't know that for certain. So I have there's always a little doubt that something could happen. Someone could forget breaking into my car. Someone could rear end me and damage my car unintentionally. Do you know for certain that someone won't laugh at your shoes and hurt your feelings? You don't really know that. So tolerating doubt and having a little bit of uncertainty sometimes can make us feel uncomfortable, but that level of uncomfortableness actually is helping us develop our critical thinking. We're starting to be very aware of who we are and our surroundings, and also how and when we take risks. That's an important part in our critical thinking skill development. Okay, let's talk about problem solving. This is a really key component to critical thinking, and sometimes people think this is the only component, that a good critical thinker knows how to solve problems. And while that's true, those with good critical thinking skills have all 8 of these things really pinned down. So in solving a problem, you really need to walk through these different steps. First, identifying what are the symptoms of the problem. What's going on here? Narrowing things down to really understand the root of the problem. Researching and developing solutions. How many choices do you even have? Maybe you don't have any. Maybe it's just one. Then analyzing those solutions. Which of these choices will work best and why? Really play it out so that you can really predict what the outcomes are. Remember, that comes down to emotional intelligence. And then finally, step 5, solving and evaluating your results. What worked and why? Could you use this solution again? Or next time, maybe do you need to try something else? I remember the very first time that someone taught me how to study. I truly had no idea what I was doing. And she said to me, well, aren't you going to study for the exam? I said, I guess so, but I don't really know what I'm doing. And she said, well, tell me what problems do you have? What don't you know? I said, I have no idea what I don't know. So she forced me first to identify what my symptoms were. Essentially, what were the areas that were to be covered on the exam and what were my weakest points? Then she helped me narrow it down. What was the root of my problem? I truly didn't know how to study. I didn't know how, so once I identified my symptoms, I didn't know how to tackle them. So she helped me develop some possible study skills. She introduced me to flashcards. She introduced me to oral study tips where she would give me a vocabulary word and I would define it, so working with a study partner. She helped me kind of figure out what was going to be the best way for me. I tried a bunch of different things. I'm a very social person, so of course I opted for the study group. It turned out actually that that wasn't the best for me. So for the next exam, I went over to those flashcards, and that ended up being the best thing for me. So solving problems and walking through these steps are the most sound ways to solve a problem, but that analytical piece, or that solving and evaluating the results, because you might not always solve it correctly, is really key to developing those critical thinking skills and benefiting you for the future. Let's talk about making intelligent decisions. How do you know if you're making a smart decision? This kind of thing might seem difficult at first, but this is where you're asking yourself those question words. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. Who does my decision impact? How will I benefit from this decision? Also consider if it's legal. What will result of my decision? And why am I even making this decision to begin with? Maybe I don't have a decision to make after all. Think about where this decision will take you or your family or your friends, and also when you have to make this decision by. I think that's a key point. Sometimes we put ourselves in positions to make a decision much sooner than we actually need to make one. For example, the other day I was helping a student. He was trying to figure out what he might want to major in. And after a conversation and doing some research, he said, wow, this would be great. Okay, I think I'll go either to San Francisco or UCLA. And I said, well, how are you making that decision? He said, well, I don't know, they just seem like good schools. So I explained to him that he actually had quite a bit of time before he needed to make that decision, and that he might want to research some other schools that had both of his majors, so that when he did choose where to apply, and even if he did choose those same two schools, but he was basing that more in fact and research. Give yourself the time to make a decision. Consider the impact. Once you go through and asking yourself these questions, you're very likely on the road to making intelligent decisions and developing your critical thinking. Let's talk about fact versus opinion, because this actually, I think, should almost be before the decision making. Consider this statement. In most cases, people tend to lie if they think that they are protecting themselves or someone that they love. Fact or opinion? In most cases, people tend to lie if they think that they are protecting themselves or someone that they love. That's an opinion. There is no research or scientific evidence that proves that in most cases, essentially it doesn't use the word all, but it's implying that all people tend to lie. In most cases. There are so many cases, and we're talking all the people. That is absolutely an opinion statement, but it's worded in such a way, it's worded with such authority that we might not see that. I'll be honest, the first time I read that statement, I thought, oh, that's fact. Until I continued reading and realized and was challenging myself to understand that that's actually an opinion. You really have to listen for statements of fact versus those statements of opinion. So let me give you an example of two more. Critical thinking can be learned and developed. This is a fact. We know that this is a fact. Cornerstone states it. I'm telling you. There's also research that shows that it's true. The statement of opinion, however, is critical thinking is an important skill to develop. Why I believe in this opinion strongly, who am I to say that it is an important skill? Right? So you have to think about really the authority, the person behind the message, which then takes us to seeking truth. That idea of when we stop short because we were given information by someone that we trust or someone that's tapping into some emotional part of us. Sign up today and receive a free tote. Hurry, supplies are limited. It's a sense of, oh my gosh, I have to rush, otherwise I'm not going to get my free tote bag. Or this is a true statement, actually a student once shared with me. My father told me I can't go to college because college loans are over 25%. And what she meant there was the interest rate was 25% or more. Interest rate on college loans right now are at an all-time low. I think it's at like 3.25%. So she trusted her father because it's her father and she respects him. But he did not give her a statement of fact. He believed it to be fact, but he actually was not an authority on the subject. But because she trusts him so much in other areas of her life, she believed that to be true. It's difficult, that seeking the truth and differentiating fact and opinion, because sometimes we find out that someone that we love or someone that we trust has not been giving us the correct information. And sometimes it's not because they meant to give us incorrect information. It's just that they thought that they knew the truth. All right, let's talk about creativity and being resourceful. Again, this boils down to the who, what, when, where, why, and how. In terms of thinking creatively and being resourceful, think about what is available to you. Who can help you? How can you look at this problem in another way and develop that other perspective? Where can you find more answers? When do you need a solution by? And why does this problem even exist? Sometimes having that context really helps solve a problem or helps you think creatively so that you can solve a problem. In class, we've talked a lot about Maslow and the hierarchy of needs, specifically reaching that self-actualization. People who are self-actualized have this pinned down and have a high level of critical thinking skills. Think about that as you work toward developing your own critical thinking skills, how you're going to develop your emotional intelligence, think creatively, challenge those information and people that you trust to ensure that the information that you are getting is factual and rooted in evidence so that you can make smart and intelligent decisions to solve problems. Good luck.